An unassuming motel in Hammond, Indiana, located at the 3800 block of 179th Street. Somewhere around 5 p.m. on Friday, October 17th, 2014. It's a calm, cool night at the Motel 6, an affordable place to rest overnight, or partake in other, more short-term activities.
While some turn to this cheap, anonymous venue for pleasure, others use it as a place to inflict pain.
A young woman is brutally murdered in an unspeakable crime that shocks the state of Illinois to its core. But it's only the beginning.
The brazen killing reveals a descent into darkness so vile that it grabs the attention of an entire nation.
What starts as one will end as many, and it takes critical cooperation from law enforcement and the use of cutting-edge technology before the brutal killer is finally caught. Elgin, Illinois, 35 miles northwest of Chicago along the Fox River. It's known as the Jewel of the Midwest. With a population of just over 100,000, it is the sixth largest city in the state.
Once known as the butter capital of the world for achieving fame for the butter and dairy goods sold, it's now a vibrant city with a rich history of Victorian architecture.
It is here that Lori Townsend gives birth to a baby girl on April 19th, 1995. She names her daughter Africa with 2 Ks, a unique and beautiful name for a unique and beautiful new life.
Primarily a gender-neutral name of English origin, meaning from Africa, Lori made sure to have her bundle of joy stand out with the unique spelling.
Growing up, Africa always impressed her mom.
She could walk in a room full of people and they just stop and she was, her smile, her beauty, stunning, my beauty queen.
And stand out Africa did. From a young age, she was an extremely charismatic person, able to keep the people around her laughing and happy.
Lori and her daughter eventually moved to the bigger city of Aurora, Illinois, with a population density second only to Chicago.
A strong bond between mother and daughter is extremely powerful. Africa and her mother were ready to take on the world.
Lori says her and Africa were best friends as she grew up, and there was no evidence of strife between them.
She used to tell me when she was growing up and stuff, Mama, I'm going to be famous.
Africa stays with her mother in Aurora until 2014, just a few months before that fateful night at the Motel 6.
A recent graduate of the Denver Center for 21st Century Learning, Africa hungers for independence. So, over the summer, Africa moves again, this time on her own, to Chicago.
Like many young adults just out of high school, Africa is drawn to the big city, and she falls in love with a confident, cavalier crowd.
She's a young social woman and is desperate to meet others with similar qualities such as hers, and it doesn't take long to do so.
Africa becomes close with Shamika Cunningham, and Shamika is as confident and cavalier as they come. The two fast friends decide to go into business together.
This is 2014, and prostitution has evolved. The dark trade is now primarily online. It's a revolutionary alternative to traditional sex work.
Africa and Shamika begin to offer their services as escorts to earn extra money. They use a website called Backpage.com to connect with potential clients.
Backpage gives escorts the power and control to book and vet their own clients.
It also makes them vulnerable to potential predators who know how to present trustworthy versions of themselves through the veil of a screen.
Even though Africa is only 19 years old, she's smart and she's as careful as she can be. She makes it her practice to send messages to friends with details of who she's meeting, where, and at what time, just in case anything unexpected happens.
So just after 5 p.m. on October 17th, Africa does what she has so many times before. She sends a text to Shamika, informing her she is meeting with a client nicknamed Big Boy Appetite. Hours later, Shamika hasn't heard back from Africa, and she starts to worry. She wonders why the appointment is taking so long.
Shamika often worried about Africa, knowing that her friend's outgoing and charismatic personality could potentially attract those that would cause her harm.
She tries calling Africa.
8 attempts at contacting her friend without receiving a response. Then she tries texting.
She eventually receives a text back. It states, "Done, was a GD1. Gonna see him soon. Night Girl X."
Alarm bells go off. This is not at all how Africa usually talks over text.
Africa's friend Shamika immediately suspects her friend may be in trouble.
These women are close friends. Shamika immediately notices a difference in tone and use of slang from her regular text exchanges with Africa.
Shamika is extremely worried. With the strange phrasing of the text, maybe her friend Africa is trying to signal she needs help. Or maybe Africa didn't send the text at all.
Shamika and a male acquaintance rush to investigate. What they find in Africa's room is the stuff of nightmares.
They enter with caution, concerned of who or what they might see.
Signs of a struggle. The bed is pulled away from the wall. They call out but receive no response. Then one of them notices an unusual sound.
In the bathtub, Shamika discovers her closest friend, naked and unresponsive. Water from the shower raining down.
Africa has no pulse. There's bruising around her neck. Despite all their efforts to protect each other from harm in this dangerous game, it didn't work. Shamika's best friend is gone.
This kind of trauma can leave permanent scars, which may only be diminished after professional counseling. It will be a long time before Shamika can properly process the grotesque and violent scene that she witnessed.
Initially, police arrive at the scene and are unable to find an obvious murder weapon. Instead, they find small, unique articles left behind that allow them to begin to piece together the horrific scenario.
Forensic specialists comb the room and discover several clues. A broken fingernail, a ripped-off shirt button, and a torn condom wrapper, to name a few.
Shamika is convinced that this is the work of Africa's scheduled client for that night. Big Boy Appetite.
The officers see the text message. "Done, was a GD1. Gonna see him soon. Night Girl X."
Shamika shares her theory with the investigator that the text doesn't sound like Africa, and she believes it may have been sent from someone else. Again, Africa's client, Big Boy Appetite.
Investigators are looking for any leads, so Shamika pointing out Africa's last client is a strong lead.
Would the murderer really have been so brazen to take the time after killing Africa to text a message from her phone?
Making matters worse, Africa's phone is nowhere to be found at the crime scene.
Murder of this nature, seemingly random in a public place at a busy time of day, is already very concerning to investigators.
But the disturbing detail of the suspicious text puts investigators on red alert. They may not be dealing with your average killer here. Is this a signal that Big Boy Appetite is more cold and calculated than even they can imagine? "19-year-old Africa Hardy has been found in the bathtub of a Motel 6 in Illinois. The escort has been strangled to death and left in a bathtub with the shower running. Africa's best friend Shamika suspects a client is responsible, a man she met on Backpage.com with the handle of Big Boy Appetite. But investigators aren't yet ready to jump to any conclusions.
This is a brutal crime, and police don't know who they're dealing with here. They want to make sure they examine every clue and leave no stone unturned.
The police waste no time in examining the evidence.
The ripped off button, it's important because it doesn't match the clothing Africa was wearing that night. If this can be matched to a suspect's shirt missing the same button, it will become strong circumstantial evidence of their guilt.
But who's to say the button was either from the murderer or the victim? The Motel 6 chain is highly recognizable and often used in the state. It could have been left behind by anybody.
They also suspect that whoever committed this crime may still possess other condoms of the same brand, linking them even more definitively to the scene.
A definite lead, but investigators realize it's like a needle in a haystack, as the brand name of the condoms are used by a majority of people.
It's also possible DNA may have been left under the broken fingernail that presumably came from Africa's hand.
DNA under the fingernails is often a good bet, especially when a crime scene shows signs of a physical altercation.
DNA analysis takes time and requires a suspect to match it with. But in the meantime, they've got a much more direct path to follow.
With escorts and clients connecting online these days, over websites, computers, and cell phones, there may be digital footprints that lead investigators right to Africa's killer.
If Africa and her clients texted or called each other, then homicide investigators are legally authorized to obtain warrants compelling telecom companies to share cell phone records.
By pulling call data from Africa's phone, police are able to find the phone number of the client from that night.
And the phone number leads them to a name, Darren Dion Van. This is a promising lead, and investigators set about learning as much as they can about Van. And what they discover is not pleasant.
Darren Dion Van was born on March 21st, 1971 in Indiana. The specific city is unknown, but it is presumed he grew up in Gary, where he lived for a large part of his life. In 1991, he joins the Marine Corps, but is discharged 2 years later for reasons cited as other than honorable.
Once Darren Van is relieved of his duties, he finds himself spiraling even more outside of the Corps, as normal day-to-day life seems difficult for him.
Van struggles to hold down a regular job, working for brief periods at temp agencies.
Temporary work may have been the only work Van could find. After all, there's a reason why potential employers look out for gaps in resumes or a string of short-term jobs. It indicates the potential employee may be difficult to work with, irresponsible, or socially awkward.
He struggles to hold together his marriage, too. Van's new wife, Maria Matlock, is 29 years older than him, creating friction in the family between him and her grown children.
Maria's children aren't the biggest supporters of the relationship, as they find Darren Van to be difficult to handle.
It would be natural for Matlock's children to assume that the much younger man may be taking advantage of their mother, and perhaps not have her best interest at heart. So they were on high alert.
Van's problems start to compound, and his life becomes a powder keg. In 2004, although he's still married to Maria, Van is arrested for threatening the life of a woman named Saritha Grant. Grant is described as Van's girlfriend.
It's a terrifying assault.
It's just after 2 a.m. on November 25th, 2010, Thanksgiving Day in Ruskin, Florida. Brothers Juan and Sergio Guitron are playing poker on the front porch of a friend's house on Ocean Mist Court. It's been a great night, but cousins Ramon, Richard, and Juan want to head out to another party.
They start making their way to leave, but they get caught up in conversation. Next thing you know, 20 minutes pass.
The guys barely notice as an uninvited guest arrives. It's a law enforcement officer.
The sheriff asks the group of men where Creeper is. Then he orders them all to lie down on the ground.
And that's when this holiday gathering becomes a nightmare affair.
When the dust settles, brothers Juan and Sergio Guitron are dead. 4 others are critically injured, and the officer is gone. The sheer level of violence on a calm celebratory eve shocks the entire community.
While the terror took place in an instant, it will take another 10 years before the pieces are together to get justice for the Guitron brothers and to see their murderer put behind bars. Ruskin, Florida, a community of 17,000 people on the beautiful shores of the Little Manatee River.
There's a lot of natural beauty around, including the Lisi Shell Pits, home to what might be the world's largest Ice Age fossil deposit. It yields tens of thousands of bones and several hundred species of Ice Age mammals.
It's a relaxing city with something for everyone, whether to visit or for Juan and Sergio Guitron to call home.
Juan and Sergio are kind, hardworking, and honest. They're brothers and good friends, and they've both always been especially close to their mother, Paz Quezada.
Juan Guitron is born on July 12, 1982. A few years later, on February 11, 1988, Sergio joins the family.
Juan takes his role as older brother seriously, and the two form a very strong bond, a bond that only grows stronger when their father passes away in 2004. They make a pact to be united always. The 3 of them are now inseparable. They're like one person.
The family honors their pact, living together and sharing expenses into adulthood.
Sergio loves to cook. He often makes fajitas, hamburgers, and carne asada. But not just for his mom and brother. Sergio likes to invite cousins and friends over for cookouts. He's the more the merrier type.
Especially on the holidays. As Thanksgiving approaches, many people are looking forward to spending time with friends and family, including the Guitrons.
Thursday, November 25th, 2010 is the big day. But for Juan and Sergio, the celebration begins the night before, November 24th.
Juan Guitron and cousins Ramon Galan and Richard Cantu are hitting up a Thanksgiving Eve party.
Sergio picks up another friend, hairdresser Gonzalo Guevara, and they stop for supplies.
They get an 18-pack of Corona and some blunts.
Juan, Sergio, and the group arrive at the party sometime before 9 p.m. It's being hosted by Jose Rodriguez at his girlfriend Yvonne Lucas's place at 604 Ocean Mist Court. The Lucas family's front porch is a regular neighborhood hangout.
One of the best things about Thanksgiving is that it's a day off. So the night before is a perfect time to stay up late and have a few drinks with friends. And that's exactly what these guys are doing.
Later, Sergio and Gonzalo head off to get more beer. But they also make one other stop. They buy another 18-pack of Corona, and they buy a small amount of cocaine.
The 4 friends share the gram of cocaine and continue playing poker and drinking beer until 1:30 a.m.
At approximately 1:30 a.m., Juan Guitron, Ramon Galan, and Richard Cantu arrive.
They won't be staying long, but they do bring a 12-pack of beer to share.
After about 45 minutes, Juan, Ramon, and Richard are getting ready to leave.
The group chats and ribs each other about who wants to come along. They're in their own little world right now.
Suddenly, they hear a loud voice say, "Where's Creeper?"
The men turn their attention to a deputy who's approaching the porch. The officer repeats the question a few times. Where's Creeper? Everyone says they don't know or they don't know him.
He kept asking where Creeper was, and he demanded that they get down on their knees and provide him with identification. So he was trying to confirm and look for a particular individual.
Most of the young men try to comply by pulling out their wallets and getting down on the ground.
Danielle Bertrand, Richard Cantu, and Gonzalo Guevara all comply. Then they hear a gunshot.
Daniel looks over his shoulder and sees Juan Guitron fall, but doesn't see any blood. He figures the officer is shooting blanks or beanbags to calm everybody down.
A beanbag round, or a flexible baton round, is typically fired from a shotgun. It's used for a less lethal apprehension of suspects.
Daniel turns to see Richard struggling to get his ID out. Then, again, gunshots.
The deputy walks up behind Richard, presses the gun to the back of his head, and pulls the trigger. The officer is not shooting beanbags.
In a desperate move, Daniel grabs a beer bottle and tries to hit the shooter. The gunman sees it coming and shoots Daniel in the hip.
The force of the shot sends Daniel back to the floor. He then feels a foot on his back and a gun on the back of his head. Daniel thrashes around as much as he can. If he's going down fighting.
The officer takes his foot off Daniel and then takes another shot at Daniel. But this time, he misses.
Thinking he may be in the clear, Daniel desperately pulls himself up, but it's a big mistake. The cop is still there, and he shoots Daniel in the chest.
The man shoots Daniel in the back and then fires again. The bullet grazes Daniel's ear and cheek.
The shooter never covers his face. Maybe he figures everyone who sees it will soon be dead.
He basically lined up 6 individuals on a porch and started shooting them one by one, all for the specific purpose of locating an individual by the name of Creeper.
In total, Daniel shot 4 times. He's bleeding. He's in pain.
Daniel Beltran fled for his life by throwing himself off the porch, crawling around the house, and eventually throwing himself over a fence in the backyard to escape for his life.
Daniel uses every last ounce of strength to hurl himself around the corner of the house, where he uses a chair to climb over a 6-foot fence and phone his ex-girlfriend to help.
As he does, he hears 4 more shots in the distance.
When first responders arrive on the scene, they find Sergio Guitron dead. His brother Juan is rushed to Tampa General Hospital, where at 5:42 a.m., he also dies.
There are bullet casings and blood all over the porch. The bullets appear to be .45 caliber, a popular police gauge.
Kenosha County Medical Examiner Dr. Mary Mainland arrives at about 9:45 a.m. and notices 2 gunshot wounds on Sergio's body.
The bullet passed into Sergio's chest and through his heart and lungs. The cause of death is officially declared a homicide.
Juan has 2 gunshot wounds in his back. The upper wound goes through his left lung and exits through his left armpit. The second wound goes through the kidney, spleen, liver, stomach, and pancreas. It exits through the right side of Juan's ribcage.
4 other victims are in hospital, but one remains at 604 Ocean Court. Jose Rodriguez, whose home is the scene of the massacre, but who is not shot or injured.
Jose is very upset and unable to talk at first, but he eventually provides investigators with a pretty good description of what happened out there on that porch.
Every piece of evidence that they ended up uncovering really supported their account of what happened up on that porch.
As Jose sits at the table where he and his friends are playing cards, Jose notices something unusual.
Jose sees a dark-colored minivan drive slowly down the street.
He doesn't think too much of it, until a few minutes later when the van comes back. Jose then watches as an unknown man walks up the driveway towards them. His shirt is black with white letters on it that say Sheriff. He also sees that the man is carrying a gun.
A gun that will be used to end the lives of his close friends. It's the early hours of November 25th, 2010, after a horrific shooting occurs on the front porch of Jose Rodriguez's house. Unharmed in the incident, Jose explains to investigators he saw a man dressed as a sheriff approach. The man asks, "Where is Creeper?" An odd name to ask, and the outcome turns fatal.
Everyone says they don't know Creeper, but that's actually a lie. Creeper is a guy they know from the neighborhood. In fact, they can almost see his house from where they're sitting.
It's a normal reflex in some communities. When a police officer's looking for someone, you just mind your own business and say you don't know him. So it's no big surprise that they would lie.
When the deputy orders them all to get on their knees and show him ID, Jose complies, but when Juan says he left his in his car, the deputy gets angry and shoots Juan in the back twice.
The officer then shoots Sergio and Gonzalo and aims for Jose. Shockingly, in that moment, Gonzalo moves to the side and blocks Jose from the shooter's line of fire. So, Gonzalo gets shot again.
At some point after all of the shooting had stopped, he was able to crawl into the house and get on a couch before EMS got there and was able to airlift him and the other victims to the hospital.
And Jose is unharmed. Investigators know Jose's account is just part of this complicated story. They're hoping some of the other victims can fill in more details.
Richard Cantu was shot in the head and was severely injured and was never able to remember anything that happened to him.
After getting shot point blank in the head, Richard Cantu is lucky to be alive. He can't tell detectives anything as he clings to life in Tampa General Hospital.
Ramon Gallen survived his 4 bullet wounds, but only remembers the first one. He tells police he blacks out and doesn't see what happened to anyone else.
Gonzalo Guevara, who was awaiting surgery for his left hand, recalls a little more.
Gonzalo sees the black shirt with letters that say Sheriff.
Finally, investigators talk to Daniel Beltran, who, remarkably, is still alive. Detectives can hardly imagine taking 4 bullets and still crawling away, climbing a fence, and calling his ex-girlfriend.
Daniel is able to provide a description of the suspect. 6 feet tall, about 180 to 190 pounds with dirty blonde hair.
The most critical piece of evidence that we had came from the fact that we had live surviving witnesses to the case, surviving victims. They were able to provide law enforcement with statements that the killer made to them that became critical to the investigation.
Investigators now have some information, but not a lot. And with the possibility of a rogue cop on the loose who's just unloaded on a group of young men, things could get even uglier and messier than they already are.
With just bits and pieces to go on so far, officers investigating the November 25th, 2010 shooting at Ocean Mist Court are still in the dark. Until they receive a tip from one of their informers to check out a guy named Michael Keatley.
You can't always trust informants, but Michael Keatley's known to them, so police decide to follow up.
Under the guise of a routine traffic stop for speeding, police bring Michael Keatley in for questioning.
He denies any knowledge of a mass shooting and says he was at a party down in Palmetto on November 24th. He says he spent Thanksgiving Day at his sister's in Seffner. Looks like the informant's hot tip turns out to be a dead end, wasting precious police time and moving this case one step closer to turning cold.
But it's all police have to go on for now, so they do a little digging into Michael Keatley's background anyway. and it yields some interesting results. Michael Keatley is born in 1970 and is raised by his parents in the Ruskin Sun City Center area.
Michael gets a job working on small planes and later is hired by Delta Airlines to work on jets.
He lives in Atlanta, Georgia for 9 years, but then Delta lays him off. He moves back home to Ruskin and does odd jobs while hoping to get back into the airline industry.
One of the odd jobs Michael Keatley does is sell ice cream. He drives a purple ice cream van around Ruskin, selling frozen treats to anyone who flags him down.
Many of Michael's customers are children of Miwama migrant farm workers, so he prices his wares reasonably at $1 or less. He doesn't make a big profit, but he feels good about it. This job might not be the illustrious airline industry, but Michael's happy. He's right where he wants to be.
Until one day when a random act of violence changes Michael Keatley's world forever. On January 23, 2010, after his ice cream shift ends at 6:30 p.m., Michael gasses up the truck and heads home to get ready for a date.
In the 4,000 block of Old U.S. Highway 41, 4 people flag Michael's truck down.
Believing they're customers, Michael pulls over to sell a few more treats before calling it a night. But as the truck stops, the people pull out guns and demand cash.
2 males and 2 females board the van and order Michael to turn around. When Michael Keatley doesn't immediately comply, they start shooting.
Michael sustains bullet wounds in his leg, his chest, his left arm, and 1 bullet goes through his right knuckles and wrist.
He was a victim of horrific crime.
The suspects rob Michael of $12 and run off, leaving him for dead.
Incredibly, with a left arm that he can't move and a mangled right hand, Michael picks himself up and drives to a nearby friend's house. Rosa Hinojosa and her family, who are regular customers of Michael's, call 911 and do their best to keep him alive while waiting for an ambulance.
In an instant, Michael's simple, happy life is shattered.
Michael tells the press he wants his violent attackers caught. He calls them absolute scum and says if they were so brazen to shoot him like this, over $12, they're going to just kill anybody.
He was able to give a description of the vehicle, and that was all that law enforcement had to go on.
Before the brutal attack, Michael is a friendly, easygoing guy, well known as the Happy Ice Cream Man.
But after the brutal attack, Michael starts to change.
His injuries have left him permanently disabled.
He was shot in both hands and lost use of both hands for a while before he started his recovery.
He needs several surgeries and his right hand doesn't work very well.
Michael has worked with his hands his whole life. This senseless attack completely ruins his livelihood and his sense of safety.
He went from living on his own separately to having to move into his parents so they could take care of him. They had a medical bed that they set up in, and he needed help to be, fed, daily grooming activities, going to the bathroom, all those things that we take for granted that you can do yourself. He actually could no longer do for himself. So it really had a very severely devastating impact on his life.
Michael enlists the help of neighbor David Beckworth, who lives next door to Michael's parents.
David Beckworth is a 3-time convicted felon and knows how to use guns. The 2 men practice firing together.
Since Michael has become intensely fearful, he hires David as a bodyguard to ride along with him in the ice cream truck. Michael insists David keep a loaded .45 caliber pistol with him at all times.
When Michael and David go to work selling ice cream, Michael constantly interrogates customers, asking them if they know anything about the shooting or if they know a man with a tattoo on his arm that says Creeper. It's one of the only things Michael remembers about his attackers.
He began conducting his own investigation when he was healed enough to start driving his ice cream truck again. So it became clear, even with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the detective who initially was investigating, he had informed law enforcement that that's exactly what he was doing, that he was getting his own information.
David starts to grow uncomfortable with Michael's increasingly paranoid and obsessive acts.
He was obsessed. He went to another level where he actually was confronting people in the street who were Hispanic and making accusations.
One night, Michael drives the ice cream truck into a pretty dangerous neighborhood looking for Creeper.
When he turns the truck down a particularly scary road, David asks him to stop and let him out.
Michael makes fun of him, so David presses the gun to Michael's head. David gets out, tosses the gun back in, and never works for Michael again.
David Beckworth isn't the only person who started to get freaked out by Michael Keatley's behavior. Investigators talk to Michael's ex-girlfriend, Norma Jean Towers, who tells her own interesting stories.
Norma says Michael takes her down to the spot where he was shot one day and asks her to write down any passing license plate numbers and vehicle descriptions.
Michael wears a disguise while she's perfectly visible in the passenger seat. She tells him never to do this to her again.
Norma also recalls watching a marathon of old vigilante movies. And that same fall, the couple goes to a gun show where Michael purchases a .45 caliber handgun.
There's no doubt Michael Keatley has both physical and emotional scars from the brutal attack that almost ended his life. But none of it is connected at all to the men at 604 Ocean Mist Court who were gunned down by a sheriff's officer that Thanksgiving morning in 2010.
As the case threatens to go cold, maybe the answer police are looking for is closer than they think. A late-night party at 604 Ocean Mist Court on November 25, 2010, turns to horror when a sheriff's officer opens fire on a group of friends. Brothers Juan and Sergio Guitron are killed in the chaos. With little else to go on, investigators follow up on a tip about an ice cream truck driver who was a victim of violence himself, Michael Keatley.
As this investigation continues, law enforcement starts interviewing witnesses, and it becomes clear based on their investigation that there is an individual who is going around Ruskin and Waimama, and that's the area where the defendant drove in his ice cream truck looking for a person named Creeper.
Police have been told the well-liked ice cream man is obsessed with finding people who shot and robbed him 9 months previous, and he's been asking around about a man named Creeper.
Once it became clear that this was a targeted attack with a particular individual that law enforcement was looking for, somebody who was looking for Creeper, who wanted to kill Creeper, they focused in on that.
Armed with more background on Michael Keatley, police called their original informant, Esteban Rivera, to learn more about how these two know each other.
Esteban says Michael Keatley offered him $1,500 to either find the people who attacked him or take care of this for him.
Michael shows Esteban mugshots of possible suspects and mentions the name Creeper. He offers to give Esteban a bulletproof vest and a sheriff's shirt to give him some protection and an air of authority.
Esteban tells police he didn't take him seriously at the time, but in light of the incident on Thanksgiving, Esteban wondered if Michael might just be involved.
With nothing to lose and nothing more to go on, investigators decide to show victim Jose Rodriguez a selection of photos, one of which is Michael Keatley.
Much to the officer's disappointment, Jose says he doesn't recognize Michael at all.
It's frustrating. You never know when you're dealing with an informant whether the information is accurate or not, and sometimes it leads to a dead end.
The next day, however, Jose calls police back and says he in fact does recognize Michael Keatley from a different photo, one that investigators didn't show him.
A friend has shown Jose a cell phone picture of Michael that's been circulating in their neighborhood.
This was a case that captivated the community because there were 6 people shot on Thanksgiving. So everybody was talking about it. There was a lot of local media coverage. You can imagine 6 people are shot, their family members. and friends are talking about it. The neighbors are talking about it. Word is spreading very quickly.
Michael has some heat on him because he's been asking around about Creeper.
The location of where this, horrific shooting occurred was broadcast all over the local news. And it was very clear to witnesses who were familiar with the defendant and some of the statements that he had made before.
Jose Rodriguez positively identifies Michael Keatley as the shooter from the other photo.
This is good news, but could cause some legal complications. Jose failed to identify Michael as the shooter from the selected photos police showed him.
If the cell phone picture being circulated comes with the connotation that Michael is the shooter, it could be considered biased.
With Jose's identification at risk, police turn to the other surviving victims in hopes they might be able to corroborate the ID.
On November 27, 2010, Daniel Beltran is shown a photo array in the hospital. He does not identify Michael Keatley from the lineup.
4 days later, on December 1st, officers show Gonzalo Guevara the photos.
He sees the mugshot of Michael Keatley. Gonzalo starts shaking and crying, and the machine he's hooked up to starts beeping.
Gonzalo points at the photo and says he is 2,000% sure that this is the man who shot him and his friends.
Investigators conduct a search of Michael's parents' home, where Michael has been living.
He was posing as a law enforcement officer in Halloween, which is within less than 2 months of when the shooting occurred. He actually dressed up as a law enforcement officer and went to a party.
They find a host of .45 caliber bullets and casings.
Ballistic tests show the casings from the crime scene and the casings from Michael Keatley's property were fired from the same gun.
He admitted to Lieutenant Lugo that he had a Glock firearm, that it was a Glock 21, .45 caliber, which is the type of shell casings that were found at our crime scene, as well as the type of spent shell casings.
Detectives also find a notebook with the name Omar Balin written on it, along with Omar's address, 507 Ocean Mist Court.
We find in his home a book where the name Omar Bayan with the Ocean Mist address is written in a notebook that's found in his home with his fingerprints on that notebook. So we know that he has lied to law enforcement. There are multiple pieces of evidence that showed that he was conducting his own investigation. And his name is Omar Bayan, and he lives on Ocean Mist. But he doesn't live where the shooting took place. He lived a few houses down, and they immediately interviewed him. They conducted a full interview of him. So all of that was corroborated that not only was this person targeted, he lived in that area. He lived 2 houses down.
It's just 1 block away from the murder scene at 604 Ocean Mist Court.
Police are also familiar with Omar Balin, and they're aware he has a nickname. He's known as Creeper.
On December 2nd, 2010, police arrest Michael Keatley and charge him with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of attempted murder.
With slam-dunk evidence of eyewitness identification, matched bullet casings, and an increasingly unhinged suspect, police are confident justice will be served swiftly for brothers Juan and Sergio Guitron and their friends.
But investigators will soon learn that arresting Michael Keatley and successfully prosecuting him in a court of law are 2 very different things.
Michael is held in Falkenberg Road Jail, a 2,300-bed minimum security facility in Tampa. It's mainly a pretrial holding facility and not a permanent place to house convicted felons.
On average, an inmate stays in the jail for 26 days. It can vary depending on an inmate's charges, but most prisoners don't expect to be there very long.
For Michael Keatley, the stay in Falkenberg Road Jail is an extended one.
Incredibly, Michael sits in that jail for years awaiting trial. He appears in court more than 60 times, his hair getting noticeably grayer with each date. The reason? legal challenges to the death penalty.
When the state's attorney files notice of intent to seek the death penalty in the case against Michael Keatley, it raises the bar for Michael's lawyer, Paul Carr.
That's because when Michael is arrested for murder, Paul Carr is already representing him on a couple of previous unrelated charges.
An ex-girlfriend's neighbors have an active injunction against Michael for making threats. And a fellow ice cream truck driver claims he threatened to burn her truck if she didn't stay out of his territory.
Since Paul Carr is already representing Michael on the weapons charge, he decides to defend him on the murder charge and challenge the death penalty possibility too.
The only problem is, Paul Carr is not a death penalty qualified defense lawyer. So he brings in Luann Goody from Tampa to help him.
With 2 lawyers working hard on Michael's case, it still takes almost 4 years, and the costs are becoming prohibitive.
Michael's parents are footing the bills for his defense, and it depletes their entire retirement fund, almost $200,000.
In November 2014, Leanne Gowdy asks a judge to declare Michael Keatley indigent to get help with legal expenses. The judge agrees and orders the state to pay future costs. Then, on May 13, 2016, Michael receives a letter.
Lawyer Paul Carr says that after years of representing Michael, he must withdraw from the case due to injuries he sustained in a car accident.
Carr claims to be suffering from headaches, forgetfulness, pain, dizziness, and fainting episodes. He fears his condition could lead to a wrongful conviction.
It's unusual for something like this to happen, and when cases drag on for so long, it's not impossible that a lawyer could retire or even die before it's over.
Leanne Gowdy takes over on her own as lead attorney for Michael's defense. It's a massive job.
Leanne tries repeatedly to get court-appointed help, but the State Justice Administration Commission fights her every step of the way. This slows Michael Keatley's case to a near halt.
On April 1st, 2018, 8 years after Michael's arrest, his original attorney, Paul Carr, dies.
It's the same year Leanne Goody finally convinces a judge to grant Michael Keatley bail at $900,000. Too much for Michael's family to pay, so he remains behind bars.
Despite all the massive setbacks, at long last, a trial date is set. And on February 6, 2020, almost 10 years after he's put in jail, Michael Keatley goes to trial. On December 2, 2010, police arrest Michael Keatley and charge him with the murders of Juan and Sergio Guitron, as well as the attempted murders of Raymond Galan, Richard Cantu, Gonzalo Guevara, and Daniel Beltran.
The horrific mass shooting 10 days earlier terrified the neighborhood of Ruskin, Florida, and devastated Juan and Sergio's mother, Paz Quezada.
A quick arrest doesn't equal swift justice, though. A host of legal delays slows the legal system to a crawl for 10 years. Until finally, Michael Keatley faces a judge and jury in February 2020.
This case was on a different level even without the death penalty. You had 2 deceased victims, you had 4 other victims. It was very much a circumstantial case. So there was a lengthy and thorough investigation that was done by law enforcement. So there were 60 witnesses that were listed on the trial witness list, but there were over 100 witnesses listed in discovery.
The prosecution presents a strong case with eyewitness testimony, matched shell casings, and Michael Keatley's own erratic behavior. But the defense manages to poke a few holes in it.
The murder weapon has never been found, which is a problem for the prosecution.
The other important piece of evidence that we had was, I talked about consciousness of guilt some of those evidence and the statements that he made to law enforcement to intentionally deceive them, to show that he was hiding the fact that he knew what he had done.
The defense also casts doubt on the Gonzalo Guevara's identification of Michael Keatley.
The defense alleges that detectives did not follow proper procedure in regards to the photo lineup.
In fact, the defense suggests to the jury all of the eyewitnesses' identification of Michael is tainted because of the cell phone photo that was circulated.
On February 21st, 2020, after just 7 hours of deliberations, the jury announces they are hopelessly deadlocked. The judge declares a mistrial.
10 of the jurors are convinced Michael is guilty, but 2 are unable to agree. It's a crushing disappointment for the victims and their families.
A mistrial essentially means that the trial has to be started from scratch. It's not an acquittal for the accused. He can most certainly be tried again in the future. It's good news and bad. Prosecutors most definitely want to try Michael Keatley again. But if they hope to secure a conviction next time, they need to make sure their case is rock solid.
The only thing police and prosecutors can do now is go back to the very beginning and make sure nothing else is left in question. Three years later, on March 6, 2023, the second trial of Michael Keatley begins in Tampa, with Judge Christopher Sabella presiding.
This time, the prosecution paints a picture of a man obsessed with revenge for an attack that leaves him permanently disabled. An attack the police have not solved, forcing Michael to take matters into his own hands.
It became clear, even with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the detective who initially was investigating that case, that Mr. Keatley would routinely call in and ask for updates and provide them with information. And during that course of that pending investigation, he had informed law enforcement that that's exactly what he was doing, that he was getting his own information.
In his quest for revenge, Michael Keatley may have seen himself as some sort of vigilante officer, a righter of wrongs, a citizen hero doing the job police seemed unwilling or unable to do, bring his attackers to justice.
So on November 25th, 2010, Keatley dresses up as a sheriff's officer and goes looking for a man named Creeper at 604 Ocean Mist Court. Once he gets to the street, however, he finds 7 friends socializing on a nearby front porch.
He approaches and asks about Creeper, and when no one in the group tells him where Creeper is, Michael Keatley, for reasons we may never understand, starts shooting him.
And he doesn't stop until Juan and Sergio are dead, and all but one of the others is wounded.
Ballistics show a match between the casings found in Michael's home and the casings at the crime scene.
Finally, Assistant State Attorney Michelle Doherty says Keatley made himself a suspect.
By writing Creeper's real name, Omar Balin, and his address, 507 Ocean Mist Court, in a notebook.
The motive became very critical in this case because we know that our killer, our perpetrator, the one person he was looking for, the only motive for this mass shooting was that he was looking for Creeper.
Defense lawyer John Grant counters that picture with one of his own. He says Michael wanted his attackers caught, not killed. Add to that, he's not physically capable of the killings because of the injuries sustained in the armed robbery of his ice cream truck.
Dr. David Halpern testifies that the injuries to Michael's right hand would make it extremely unlikely that he could even hold a weapon, let alone fire one over and over again.
Despite evidence to the contrary, Dr. Halpern's expert testimony is a huge blow to the prosecution and hard for the jury to ignore. Suspect Michael Keatley's first trial ended in a hung jury. Prosecutors are afraid this one is headed in the same direction.
Defense attorney Richard Escobar presents evidence Michael's injuries are too extensive for him to have fired a gun.
Then he pushes the idea that photo lineups were contaminated by improper procedure, since Michael's photo was circulating in the neighborhood beforehand. That cast doubt on the eyewitnesses' positive ID of Michael Keatley as the shooter.
Escobar also says police should have looked harder at Omar Creeper Balin and the possibility of a gang-related attempt to kill him.
Both sides rest their case, and on March 24, 2023, the jury deliberates for 3 hours and 40 minutes, calling it quits shortly before 9 p.m. to pick up on Monday morning.
It's a nerve-wracking weekend for friends and family of Juan and Sergio. The possibility of a second mistrial must surely be on their minds.
On Monday, March 27th, the jury deliberates for another 8 hours and 50 minutes.
Again, they stop to pick up the following day.
On Tuesday, March 28th, the jury deliberates for 1 more hour, and then they announce they've come to a decision.
The jury spends a total of 13 hours and 30 minutes making their decision. That means there's a lot of debate and discussion that's gone on. At that point, the verdict could go either way.
On Tuesday, March 29th, 2023, nearly 13 years after the killings on Ocean Mist Court, Michael Keatley is found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the shooting deaths of Sergio and Juan Guitron. He's also found guilty on 4 counts of attempted first-degree murder for shooting Gonzalo Guevara, Daniel Beltran, Richard Cantu, and Ramon Galan. On Friday, May 26, 2023, Judge Christopher Sabella sentences Keatley to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Judge Sabella actually gives him 6 life sentences, 1 for each victim he shot, to be served concurrently.
Keatley may have believed he had to take matters into his own hands to save his neighborhood from this vicious attacker.
But all he succeeded in doing was destroying several lives, including his own.
In a sad and final discovery, the man known as Creeper was not involved in Michael Keatley's armed robbery attack. Michael had been hunting an innocent man the entire time.
It was all based on hearsay. There wasn't an actual eyewitness. He was the only eyewitness to what happened to him, unfortunately.
While Juan and Sergio Guitron are gone forever, their mom Paz can rest, knowing that her boys are with their father, and the long, slow healing process can begin, with the knowledge that a desperate and misguided killer is finally caught.
贾克斯的天赋的话，我带着征服者，我带着征服者，我没带不灭之物。多兰顿出门的瓦豪的话呢，气势上来说有点弱了啊。一级的话，咱们先对 A 啊，开 E 啊。A 晕住啊，扭过去，不要被他的这个中间的伤害打到就行。我们带的有骸骨，他1级 W 比我们1级 E 技能 CD 要稍微要慢不少啊。所以的话，咱们在一警的 CD 快好的时候，就可以主动上去换血了。你比如像这一波，摸一下啊，开 E， 摸晕住，哦哟，这有点不太对呀、他 CD 咋比我快这么快？啥意思啊？晚豪 W1级现在多少秒 CD 啊？好久没有看到我的一个葵花宝典了，这感觉跟我想中的不一样呀。我1级17秒 CD， 他1级 W 跟我是1级 CD 感觉差不多呢，还是削了。你好好补，没人跟你抢啊。这时候没有无情连打被动，有点小虚，你知道吧？直接开 E 啊，晕住往后拉，A 下接 W，蜘蛛来了，摸眼 Q， 升天脚闪，他跟闪，我死，这样我心里边会点地人，行不行？我连我的死亡都可以预测，没有办法，这就是高手。无敌解说，那你按正常流程它是这样的呀，因为你看你按照你这种说法，你就必死了，你为什么要交闪？蜘蛛万一他对吧，他不交闪，你不就跑掉了吗？对不对？他交闪，他拿闪换你命，你也确实来讲你没有办法，对不对？对面打野来了，你还不能让人家抓吗？只能说我们太弱，不能1v2，对不对？所以他抓你。这样的话，晚豪比我多一个闪现。这波小兵比较多，回推线，W 先狙一下，直接开 E 摸，晕住摸跳过去摸接 W， 再摸 W 接 Q， 喜欢皮，给你机会你不中用呀，老弟，对不对？他这波的话，上波好像他没交 T， 他这波好像有 TP 的，对。所以这波单杀的话，其实他没有想中亏那么多。如果这波没踢的话，兵线进塔，这小子炸了。哎呦，哥们儿，你咋又来了呀？你是魔鬼吗，兄弟？你这打游戏打的就很没有意思了呀，兄弟。一会儿的功夫，你能来800趟，我的宝贝儿。这么晚，这么晚。不好玩了，兄弟。软柿子还是菜，你知道吗？不能1v2，菜得多练。好了，抗压，不打架了。那你妈。不是吧，兄弟，还要抓呀，兄弟。得亏这波的话，对面没伤害，我以为我要死了。哎呦，算了，交 TP， 这 TP 省不了了。太难了呀，兄弟们，太难了，这怎么玩呀？对吧？这把对现在不是晚豪，是朱豪呀。不得给我越了吧？哦，还好，只要不越他，啥事都好商量。虽然这个蜘蛛已经抓了我3波了，对吧？但是我不怪他，对吧？站在打野的立场来讲，他我这什么意思啊？不是吧？不是疯了？ 为啥？爽。这万豪有点大病，我说实话，这蜘蛛也有病啊。这回头还敢回头跟我打？你这不给哥们养肥起来了吗，兄弟啊？你哥们一会儿起来我锤死你啊！你说万豪这波爆我觉得他犯迷糊我就不说了。蜘蛛啥意思呀？搂个炮车漂亮，跑闹。这猪豪感觉也不是很行呀，兄弟啊。蜘蛛他住上了，他住上我喜欢住呗。队友这把优势根本可以躺赢，无所谓。继续抓啊，不抓我难受。这时候你看似我在嘲讽，其实我在给队友心魔。可以看我们家现在中单优势、下路优势，蜘蛛把所有目光都刷干啥？对不对？我就要在公屏上挑衅他，让他使劲抓我。我摆出一副抗压的姿态，等待躺赢，对不对？混一把怎么了？要不准备混一把，这把不 C 了，这把抗压。4次吧，蜘蛛好像抓我6次。第一波抓死，第二波抓死，第三波没抓死，第4波越塔他死了4次。摸接 W， 这炮车你补你就死。哎呦，大招给我砸走之后，这个一技能用不到了。哎呦，什么意思啊？这波的话处理的有瑕疵，大招一摔完之后有个身位，这个一技能不该开的，